Hi, today we will be discussing the Cornell note-taking system, which is a system for taking notes the proper way. Keep in mind as you view this video that you should be taking notes and writing down important items that you will need throughout the remainder of the semester. After learning how to take Cornell notes, you will be expected to use this system when taking notes in class. As you take your notes, if you all look at the Cornell Notes paper provided to you, you are going to take your notes on the right-hand side of the paper under the column that is titled Notes. Pay close attention as we discuss the format for taking notes, and you will quickly see how we will use the left-hand column in the summary box below. So let's get started. I'm sure several of you are familiar with Cornell Notes. How many of you in here have taken Cornell Notes in one of your classes? Okay, as I've expected, several of you in here are familiar with taking Cornell Notes. Cornell Notes was created at a university in New York, Cornell University, and BISD has adopted this system because there are several advantages to taking Cornell Notes. Let's discuss some of those advantages. The first advantage is that it's a method for mastering information and not just recording facts. Does anybody in here know what we mean by this? Some of you may have assumed that when you master information, that means that you really get to know what that information means and that you're not just writing it down. Sometimes when we take notes, we tend to just write things down and we don't really know what we're writing down. We're just copying information. In other words, we're practicing our handwriting instead of actually embodying that knowledge as our own. So that's one advantage of Cornell Notes. Another advantage of Cornell Notes is that it's efficient. I'm sure a lot of you have heard what the term efficient before, but you may not have ever used it, so you may be unclear as to what that means exactly. Efficient is when you're not only doing something correctly, but you're also doing it quickly. So with Cornell Notes, it's a quick way of taking notes. However, it's very accurate. For example, if you go to McDonald's, you want them to be efficient. You want your food to come out fast, but you don't want it to be incorrect because it doesn't help you if you get your food in 30 seconds, but it's the complete opposite of what you ordered. However, it doesn't help you if you get your food and it's exactly how you ordered it, but it took an hour. So those are the two advantages to Cornell Notes. Hopefully you have gotten that written down. Let's go over the steps to Cornell Notes. There are 5 steps to taking Cornell Notes, and you will be held accountable for this information, so take good notes. First of all, you're going to record. Like I stated before, when you record on the right-hand side of the paper. As you may have assumed, record just means to write down. So you're writing your notes down. Between ideas, you want to skip lines. So that next line says skip lines to separate information logically. There are several reasons why you want to skip lines while taking notes. One is that it looks neater. 2 is that it gives you an opportunity to go back and add information later. Use any obvious numbering. There are several instances when you're taking notes that you may go over steps or components that you may want to number. For example, if I come in and say, we are going to talk about the 6 different ways we should communicate in an interview. As I go through that information, when I say the first way, the second way, with each new item I introduce, you want to make sure that those are numbered. So when you go back and study, you can see what the ways consist of. Then get the main ideas down. I see so many times in classes, students struggle to write every little word down that they often miss the main idea and they're not able to really pay attention because they're focusing on crossing every T and dotting every I. Make sure you understand what the main idea of the notes are. And then abbreviate. Can anybody in here give me an example of what an abbreviation is? Some of you may have guessed an abbreviation is when you shorten a word. For example, instead of writing doctor, we write DR, or street, we may write ST. When you take your notes, you should use abbreviations because this will make your writing be faster and more simpler. Also, be sure to use graphic organizers and pictures if helpful. Some of you are really good with creating images that help you remember a concept. So if you want to draw out a graph or a picture that relates to your notes that will help you when you study later, be sure and put that in your Cornell Notes. Okay, let's go to the second step. The second step is to refine. When you refine your notes, this is when we go ahead and use that left-hand column I told you we would learn more about. You write questions in the left column about the information on the right. So for example, in your right-hand column, let's go back and use the previous slide as an example. In your right-hand column, you have all of this information. Record, using the obvious numbering, get main ideas down, abbreviate, using pictures if helpful. When you go back to your left-hand column and you're looking at that information you wrote on the right, you're going to write a question about the information on the right, and you're going to put that question on the left-hand side. Some of you who've taken Cornell Notes in the past already have an idea of what that question may be. So you may want to take this opportunity to give us some examples. What question did you write in your left-hand column about the information on the right when we're referring to this first slide? The question that I would have written is, what is record? Or what goes into recording your notes? Or how can I describe the first step of Cornell Notes? So back to refine. Now that we know what that means, we're going to write our question in the left column about the information on the right. And then we're going to go back and check and correct incomplete items. Sometimes when we're taking notes, we have to write so fast that we leave things blank, or we leave gaps or holes in our notes so that we can go back and add in information later. So clear up any loose dates, terms, names that you may not have gotten an opportunity to finish while you were taking the notes. And then you add detail to notes that are too brief to recall information in the future. For example, in the record step, I said just get the main ideas down. When you go back and refine your notes, go back and add the details about what happened during that war, or what all goes in the process of osmosis, because this is something you can use in every subject and not just communication applications. Then you're going to read notes and underline the key words. We all know that as we go through notes in a class, there are certain things in those notes that we're going to be tested on later. So when you go back and refine your notes, you want to underline those key words and call attention to those things so that when you're studying, you can give it some extra time. If we're taking notes about stage fright, and in the right we have stuttering, sweaty palms, shaking, butterflies, a recall cue for those terms would be symptoms of stage fright. And just by writing symptoms, that will trigger that information and help you remember what those symptoms are. Finally, when you are refining, you write a reflective paragraph about the notes at the bottom of the page. And if you look below at the template that I provided you, you'll notice there's a box that says summary. That is what a reflective paragraph is. Just summarize and put all of the notes in a few sentences at the bottom. If possible, compare notes with a classmate. This is very helpful. When you compare notes with a classmate, you not only get information that you may have missed, they can get information that they may have missed, and together you have more comprehensive, more thorough notes. The third step is to recite. When you recite your notes, you cover up the right side of the page. Read the questions and recite information as fully as possible. Uncover and verify frequently. You've heard the term recite before when your teachers told you in elementary school, okay, today we're going to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Recite simply means to know by heart. And if you can know your notes by heart, you are going to do amazing in the class and wonderful on any exams that you take. So when you're practicing this step of Cornell Notes, sometimes you may practice with a classmate. Sometimes you may just recite at home on your own. Since you have the two columns, it makes it very simple because you can cover it up and try to remember what it says, or you can just simply fold it over and only look at one side at a time. The fourth step is to reflect. Reflect basically means to look back over. I always tell people you never know where you're going unless you look back at where you've been. So this is true too for your notes. You have to go back and reflect on all of your notes, all of your lectures, the group activities, the class discussions, and overlap all of that information, read your recall cues, and that's going to help you better understand that content when you're preparing to use it for a project or to study for an exam. Reflection is the key to memory. The final step of Cornell Notes is to review. When you review, you go back and you recite, you reflect, you read, you reread. You pretty much repeat those steps over and over. We all know that the prefix re means again and view means to look at. So look at it again and again and again so that you can become familiar with and totally understand the information. Okay, let's go over some of the format for notes, and this will be a little bit repetitive, but we do want to review so that everyone knows what they're doing when they're taking Cornell Notes. Okay? Since you may not always have the Cornell Notes paper that I provided for you today, you may have to recreate this on regular notebook paper, which is no big deal. You mark a wide left margin to start, so larger than the red line that's already marked for you when you buy just regular notebook paper. And in your left-hand column, remember, we're going to use that for study questions and main ideas. As we go over this format for notes, you may want to take out some notebook paper and try to recreate this and see if you can get this correct while we're all working together, so that in the future it will be no problem. On the right-hand column, the larger column, you're going to use this for specific information. That's where you take your notes at, as we've discussed earlier today. While taking notes, write in the right-hand column. Okay, more on format. Use abbreviations. Shorten a word. Don't write communication every time. That's going to get old very quickly. So write COMM. If you need to shorten other words, for instance, if you're taking directions down about geography, you may want to shorten the names of the states and only use abbreviations like TX for Texas and CA for California, FL for Florida. The only thing I really suggest with using abbreviations, whatever abbreviation you use, you need to make sure that it's something you're going to remember later. It doesn't help you to come up with all these abbreviations and then you go back to study and you don't know what you meant by those shortened words. Paraphrase. Paraphrase means to basically put it in your own words. And when you paraphrase, you capture the content, which means that you get the information, but you simplify your writing so that your writing is shorter, it's simple, it's easier to read, and it's easier to understand because it's your words and not the words from a textbook or your teacher. Then you want to use symbols or highlight important information and or unclear ideas. Symbols are extremely important. Imagine if in math, every time we wrote addition or subtraction, that we actually wrote out the word instead of using the plus sign or the subtraction sign. Those save us a lot of time and a lot of paper. And then include graphics when relevant. As I mentioned before, if you learn better from pictures, a picture is often worth 1,000 words. Draw a picture or insert a graph, a T-chart, a web, a Venn diagram to help you understand concepts, especially when you're going over notes that discuss comparison, or maybe even mapping out the points of a story. Skip lines between ideas. This will help you later when you go back and refine your notes. You can add in information. Most importantly, you need to make sure that within 24 hours of taking notes that you develop study questions and identify main ideas about specifics in the right-hand column and write your study questions and main ideas in the left-hand column. Basically, what this slide is saying is that you should refine your notes within a day. Why do you think 24 hours is the time period that is suggested? As some of you may have guessed, 24 hours is suggested because then it's still fresh on your mind. If you're like me, you may have trouble remembering things at the end of the day, much less the next day or the next week. So go ahead and refine your notes while all of this information is fresh on your mind and still relatively new to you so that you can remember more of it. Here's some tips for taking notes. Be an active listener. This is so important. If you notice, when you take time to listen actively during a class, you're less likely to fall asleep or to daze off and start thinking about other things. So ask questions, answer questions, participate, write things down, become involved in the conversation. Think about what's being said. Think about how the information in your class relates to either other points that have been made in that class before, discussion with your peers or with your teacher, reading your other subjects. Ask questions. That's so important. When you ask questions, you may uncover some knowledge that you would not have already uncovered if you hadn't asked that question. Be aware of your speaker and how they organize their lecture. All of you know that all of your teachers are very different. You have some that have PowerPoint, you have some that have handouts, some use the overhead projector. You need to be aware of how your speaker is organizing their lecture so that you can be comfortable in each class with each teacher's style. You use their style to identify important points. Some may pause or slow down to let you know this is very important, so you want to write it down. Or they may pause because they want you to answer a question or to have an opportunity to participate. Some may repeat a point multiple times so that you know this is going to be on the test. I better write this down. Some may change the volume of their voice, get louder or softer to indicate that something is extremely significant in the class. And then use introductory phrases. For example, if we're introducing steps to Cornell Notes, I may say the first step is to record, and finally the last step is to review. Those introductory phrases let you know that you're moving on to a new step. And then writes on the board or uses visual aids. At any point, if a teacher or a speaker is writing on the board or using a visual aid, it pretty much goes without saying that they want you to write it down too. If they took the time to write it down or create a visual for you, it's important enough for you to write in your notes. And gestures. Gestures are hand and arm movements, and sometimes some may signal to the class. Different points of the lectures are important by various hand movements. Now, a reminder, for group work and discussions and activities, there will be several lectures in the class where you will have to take notes on all of the units that will be taught. So you'll be taking notes during lectures. Also, there will be opportunities for class discussions, and where it may be informal and there may not be a PowerPoint, I still expect you to take notes because we'll go back to these class discussions, and also group discussions. In the group discussions, you will need to take notes within your group so that you know what was discussed, who's going to be responsible for what part of the activity, and so forth. And also presentations. Oftentimes when presentations, we take notes so that we can give our presenters feedback after they are done. Now that we've concluded the Cornell note-taking system, if you have any questions, now it's the time to ask. Thanks for your attention.